Hello and welcome to the Cult Vault podcast, your dedicated podcast for uncovering the darkest corners of cults and coercive control. I'm your host, Kacey, and I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for tuning in. Your support fuels our deep dives into these critical issues. Before we get started, a word of caution. Today's episode may contain discussions on abuse, including graphic descriptions of abuse, and covers a variety of human rights violations that may be triggering for some listeners. Please consider this as a trigger warning and proceed with caution. I'm thrilled to announce that I'll be appearing at CrimeCon UK in London on the 7th and 8th of June 2025, and again in Manchester on the 27th of September 2025. Join me and a host of world-leading experts, advocates and noisemakers at the heart of the true crime community. This is the UK's biggest true crime event, and you won't want to miss it. Use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, for 10% off your tickets. And remember, there are flexible tickets and payment plans available to accommodate everyone. This incredible event is sponsored by True Crime, and it's always my favourite weekend of the year. I hope to see some of you there. And for those who want even more from the Cult Vault podcast, you can access early, ad-free content by supporting me at patreon.com/thecultvault, where every pledge not only gives you exclusive access, but also directly supports the continuation of this work. Thank you again for your support and your listenership. Now, let's unlock the vault. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host, Kacey, and today I'm joined by another author and activist. I'm really excited to welcome to the show Lloyd Evans. Hi, Lloyd.
Hello, Kacey. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. It's funny to talk to somebody in the same time zone as me. Usually I'm like, what time is it where you are? I'm confused. Hang on, the clocks are about to change. So it's 10:30 on the dot. Perfect.
Well, it is slightly different because I'm in Europe, so I'm 1 hour ahead of you. But that's compared to like transatlantic conversations. We are pretty much the same time zone. Come on, let's not quibble.
We are
over 6 minutes.
Yeah. I've got a friend in Norway, so sometimes she's an hour ahead. Sometimes she's 2 hours ahead, I think, for a little short window.
Yeah.
But then I spoke to a lady in India the other day, and she was 10.5 hours ahead.
I think what viewers need to understand with the work that you do is that figuring out time zones is one of the most stressful things when it comes to arranging these conversations.
So you've summarised it perfectly, Lloyd. You couldn't have said it any better myself.
Yeah.
So would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
My name's Lloyd Evans. I'm a former Jehovah's Witness writer, activist, filmmaker, YouTube. I spent 23 years from baptism to getting out as a believing Jehovah's Witness. It was moving to Croatia, where I am now, which ultimately kind of got me out of it because of the language barrier. I was going to meetings and not able to understand what I was being told, and for the first time it was like the indoctrination got broken. And so before I know it, I'm blogging on Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm doing extensive research into their history. I'm amassing a collection of their older literature and writings. I'm making YouTube videos. I'm writing books on Amazon, and I'm even appearing on TV in America to talk about the group. I was also involved as a core participant in the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in England and Wales, due to my specific knowledge of Jehovah's Witnesses in that area and the way they cover up child abuse. So yes, I've been quite busy over the last 13 and a half years of ex-Jehovah's Witness activism, yeah.
Just doing a little bit of everything, I think you said in your bio, you're like a filmmaker, activist, author, you have your YouTube channel, and you have the, is it the JW Survey website as well?
It's now JW Watch, yes, jwwatch.org.
Oh, that's smart.
Website,
that's clever. I like that. And just explain for the listeners what the website is all about.
So the website first started out as JW Survey because I really wanted to provide some kind of... It felt like Jehovah's Witnesses were being overlooked in terms of their actual opinions. And ironically, even witnesses who because there's like a two-tier Christianity and Jehovah's Witnesses, where a very small percentage believe they're going to rule as kings and priests in heaven. But no surprises, it's actually only a handful of men who actually get a say in what God wants them to do, and that's the governing body. So I thought it would be really interesting to provide a survey where these overlooked, anointed Jehovah's Witnesses could actually tell us what they thought, and ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses and those whose experience with the group had only been fleeting. So I started doing this annual survey, and it was interesting to do for a while, but I think I kind of reached the limit with how much I could do with that, and it just became about, well, let's keep an eye on what's happening with Jehovah's Witnesses, and let's write about what's going on with the various lawsuits against them and that sort of thing. So that became JW Watch, and really I have the website, but really now it's more a case of keeping on top of it with videos, because I think in the 21st century people consume information more visually, I've noticed nowadays, than looking at blog articles. So I tend to focus on, if there's a development, I try to cover it as succinctly as possible on my YouTube channel under the banner of JW Watch.
Well, it's a really impressive website. It's like an archive of all types of different things, from legal proceedings to news coming out of different countries. There's different things categorized here around like the LGBT community, things here about shunning. And so there's hundreds of articles, all very neatly categorized on this website. So you've got the video element of it, which is probably easier for people to consume for entertainment or education purposes. But formal education, you can still go to this website and you can have all of these different articles to reference and cite in academic papers as well. So you've really got all the areas covered, Lloyd. It's very impressive.
Thank you so much. Well, as you know, this sort of work kind of can be quite draining. I mean, there's a lot of levity, or I like to introduce levity when it comes to covering cults, because there are so many crazy, bizarre things to talk about that just lend themselves so well to comedy. But there's also kind of a dark and sinister side, and the more you wade into this stuff, particularly when it comes to children being abused and that kind of thing, it can eat away at you. And I'm sure you've experienced this, covering different cults already, where just by the end of maybe a conversation with someone like me, or at the end of researching some particular aspect of what a cult is doing, you feel kind of almost dead inside at how far-reaching and impactful and pervasive cult ideology can be, and the harm it can do in people's lives. So it definitely takes a toll, I think, on our mental health, the work that we do, but there's also a great deal of satisfaction to be derived from the messages that I receive, and I'm sure you receive, where people have really been able to start thinking for themselves due to consuming this content.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on again there, Lloyd. It's very, sometimes I have to kind of discern whether it's burnout that I'm feeling, because in creative processes, we are always going to experience you can kind of feel it pushing in a little bit, but then sometimes it's trying to work out whether it's burnout or whether it's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling really down, I need to take a break. And sometimes it can mean 2 or 3 months of not really doing too much of this stuff, burnout wise or vicarious trauma wise. So you are right, but on the flip side of that, it is very motivational to receive messages of people saying, this has really helped me, this has validated the experiences that I had no idea anybody else felt or experienced these things. And what I really, really love is when somebody messages me saying, I almost signed up and I almost sent them money, but then I found this video and I didn't. I'm like, yes, let's stop giving them the money.
Absolutely. I get similar messages like that sometimes from someone who says, I was studying with Jehovah's Witnesses and I saw your video pop up, so I just thought I'd have a look to see what's going on, and now I've cancelled my study. So that sort of message is really nice, yeah.
With your work, though, because it's all centered around this organization, I imagine there's a rabbit hole you can fall down where you're like, oh, he's talked about this, and he mentioned this, and he's done another video on that, so I'll go and watch that. It's almost like, you can become deeply educated just in the Jehovah's Witnesses by following your work. So as somebody who's almost like a theologian specific to Jehovah's Witnesses, I can ask you some questions on things that I haven't covered for a while around the kind of emergence of Jehovah's Witnesses, the history of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the changes that we've seen in modern times, and then where you fall into that personally in that timeline of the JW history.
Absolutely. I'll do my best to sum up 140 years as succinctly as possible.
Minutes, if you could.
Yeah. Yeah, well, look, it all began with a man called Charles Taze Russell, who founded a magazine. He started publishing a magazine called Zion's Watchtower in July of 1879. He was quite an eccentric character. He was an entrepreneur. His father was wealthy, and I think he inherited his father's wealth, and so he was basically a businessman. But he was also quite charismatic and fascinated by the Bible and particularly end times chronology. And he was very good at taking different ideas that were floating around at the time and just kind of stitching them together into his own kind of take of what Christianity ought to be. So he kind of summarized these beliefs in the Watchtower, and he started publishing a series which to begin with was called Millennial Dawn, but they ditched that title because it sounded like it was some kind of novel and called it Studies in the Scriptures. Actually, it turns out his wife, who was actually better educated than he was, turns out his wife likely wrote much of the first few volumes of Studies in the Scriptures, and he just took the credit. Make of that what you will. But he had all sorts of strange ideas about the inner passageways of the Pyramid of Giza, the length of them corresponding with time spans in Bible prophecy. He also had some frankly racist ideas that he said the skin of the Ethiopian will turn white in God's kingdom. So, and he believed that Armageddon would come by 1914 at the latest, which is something that current Jehovah's Witnesses don't know. That they just assume that they don't know that he made such a specific prediction about Armageddon, to the point where I actually have to show them in the book itself. So needless to say, Armageddon didn't come 1914. And really, his group called the Bible Students, I mean, they're still around today, but there's only maybe 100 or 200 of them left. They weren't like a huge following. You wouldn't have known at that time what they were going to become. But what happened was Charles Taze Russell died actually Halloween, October 31st, 1916 on a train. And there was something of a coup, a leadership coup in the wake of his death, whereby his lawyer, Joseph Rutherford, managed to assume control of the presidency, started to basically introduce his own character. Think of Charles Taze Russell as like the L. Ron Hubbard and Joseph Rutherford as like the David Miscavige. Joseph Rutherford was an altogether different kind of personality, quite an unpleasant chap. For example, in the build-up to World War II, he wrote a letter to the German regime, the Nazi regime, essentially explaining to them that they had all sorts of things in common with the German regime, including a dislike of Jewish people. So therefore, the German regime shouldn't be making things difficult for them, closing down their printing presses and that sort of thing. So this was the sort of character that Joseph Rutherford was. He was also an awful racist, and a drunkard, an alcoholic. And he obviously noticed that the 1914 prediction of Charles Taze Russell had failed, so he came up with his own prediction of 1925. He believed that by 1925, God's kingdom would already be established on the earth, and so-called ancient worthies, in other words, characters from the Bible, would magically appear I'm not making any of this up, they would magically appear in San Diego, which happened to be where he was living at the time. And they would all kind of gravitate towards this mansion that he'd persuaded someone to build for him. And he actually deeded the mansion, which was called Beth Sarim, still there today. He deeded it to David, Solomon, Moses. He put all of their names in the deed, because he was so convinced that they would appear out of nowhere and start to form this government that would rule over the earth. And needless to say, that didn't happen. 1925 came and went. But what Rutherford did was something very interesting. They had this teaching that everybody who followed the Bible students, as they were called initially, would go to heaven. So they would all form part of the 144,000 elect that I mentioned in Revelation. But they obviously had a logistical issue, which is that if you put a number on it of 144,000, it means that you're limited in how big your movement can grow. You've put a cap on yourselves. And Rutherford very ingeniously came up with this idea that actually there would be two versions of, well, first of all, he rebranded it Jehovah's Witnesses. And he also, around the same time, came up with this idea that the 144,000 would be ruling in heaven, and they'd been pretty much chosen already. What they needed to do was find the millions of people who would be living on earth underneath the rulership of the 144,000. And so that became the focus. So Jehovah's Witnesses basically started under Joseph Rutherford, to the point where Bible students get very offended if you call Charles Taze Russell the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses. But even when Rutherford died in 1941, I think it was 1941, 1942, it was still quite a small movement. It was really Nathan Knorr, his successor, who really grew the movement into kind of the household brand that we know today, because he put a lot of emphasis on missionary work, on flying out to different countries and making sure that there was kind of a codified way of preaching, and he put a lot of emphasis on training people to do preaching and get people signed up. And I'm breezing through it as quickly as I can. So we fast forward to 1975, which incidentally is a year that the Jehovah's Witnesses also prophesied would be Armageddon, or they alluded very heavily to the year 1975 as a potential date for Armageddon, if I'm being super correct. But it also happened to be in 1975 that there was another leadership coup. And this phrase that had been in circulation for a few decades of governing body, to begin with, the governing body had been the president and his board of directors. But after a few years, this board of directors started to think, well, if we're a governing body, why aren't we governing? Why does everything have to go through the president? And by 1975, there was this coup whereby the office of president essentially became redundant and the governing body took over. And so what you have nowadays, due to that, is a worldwide religion that's actually headed up by, rather than one single individual, as is the case under Scientology and certain other groups, it's headed up by, I think, 11 currently governing body members, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly aged men. There's only one black kind of token member on the body. And they are the channel that God is apparently using to communicate his will to mankind. So that's, I guess, 140 years of Jehovah's Witness history in a nutshell.
Was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Thank you, Lloyd. I am very impressed as well at how you're able to talk about certain parts of the JW history without sounding like, well, I don't know if everyone knows this phrase outside of like Europe and the UK, but like taking the piss.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because there's a number of false prophecies. There's a number of people saying, you know, actually there should be more of us in charge. You know, nothing about, actually, I'm hearing divine messages, so I should be part of the decision-making body. Nothing like that. It's just actually like, why aren't there more people? So I think it's really interesting to me how much work you might have had to do to make yourself be able to talk that way, because I can't do it.
Well, and in all honesty, I think I'm glad that you've noticed that, and I'm glad that you've said that, because it's something that I've worked on very, very hard over my 13 and a half years of doing this, is to just get my tone right. Because I just remember what it was like when I was first kind of waking up to my indoctrination. And for me, if there was anything that was overly sneering or overly mean or like a derisory mocking tone in whoever it was that I was listening to or reading, I would immediately shut down. You know, what I wanted to see in whoever's content I was consuming was, I wanted to see some sincerity, and I wanted to see as much objectivity as possible. And I remember when I was first waking up, I actually went on a website, still there, jwfacts. I'm good friends with the owner, Paul Grundy. And I remember, like, when I first went on that website, feeling just this immense fear of, oh no, like a fireball's on its way towards me right now. Like, I am toast because I'm looking up apostate information. And before I even started going through the pages, I made a beeline for like the About Us section, or where Paul had summarized who he was and why he was doing what he was doing. And there was a picture of him with his son, and all I could think about was just, what does he look like? Who is he? And I saw him with his son, and I just thought, he looks like a normal guy. You know, it's all very superficial, but I just needed that reassurance that he was someone that I felt I could relate to. And then in one of his articles I was reading, he said something towards the end, something along the lines of course, it could be that you, despite knowing all of this, you still feel as though Jehovah's Witnesses are the one true religion. And if that's the case, then that's totally fine. That's your decision. And I thought, great, that's what I need to hear. I don't need someone telling me that I'm an idiot for being in this religion. I just need someone who's going to give me the facts and let me reach my own conclusions. And I wish I could say that every ex-Jehovah's Witness activist or ex-cult activist gets that tone right. You know, because it's so tempting to go for the outrage and the kind of the sneering, kind of condescending voice. But I actively fight against it whenever I'm making my content, because I know what a huge turnoff it is to people who are taking those first steps.
You've definitely got it down so well. Just the way you talk as well, it's like, I imagine you've released your books in audio form as well.
One of them, the 800-page one is a bit problematic to make an audio book for, but I have a shorter book called How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's available on Audible. Thank you for the opportunity to plug.
I mean, that's one of the reasons we're here today.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So I don't know, maybe you know more about the statistical side of current affairs with Jehovah's Witnesses in terms of the reality of numbers and what the JW organization claim about their numbers, how many JWs there are worldwide, and how many are recruited members. From my understanding, it's more generational.
Yeah.
Than, people being proselytized to on the street or witnessed to on the street or at their homes and then coming into the fold, so to speak.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to convince a grown adult with fully formed critical thinking skills to buy into, the Jehovah's Witness ideology. The best way to do it is to get them when they're young, is to get them when they're a child. That's how I got involved. Because, of course, when your parents tell you something, why would they be lying to you, They're telling you to not put your hand in the fire, to not run into the road. They've got your back in all these other areas. Why would they be lying to you when they say that all of your school friends are going to die at an impending Armageddon? That must be true as well, You just go right along with it. And Jehovah's Witnesses have actually got it down to a fine art when it comes to child indoctrination. They have on their website an entire Pixar-style cartoon series Become Jehovah's Friend, where each episode features two children, Caleb and Sophia, although the Become Jehovah's Friend universe is slowly expanding to encompass other characters. But I think it was the second episode, lesson number 2, has Caleb throwing his toy wizard into a bin by the end of the episode because he's been convinced that this plastic toy wizard, whose name is Sparlock, I'll never forget the name, Jehovah hates him. Jehovah hates magic, and magic is a trick. Wizards and the occult and magic is a trick by Satan. And so when Caleb's friend gave him this toy, it was actually part of a sinister plot to get him to make Jehovah sad. So his mother sits him down at the table and explains all this, and obviously Caleb looks very crestfallen to begin with. And then by the end of the video, he's putting his Sparlock toy in the dumpster. And that tells you everything you need to know about how messed up the approach is towards raising children as Jehovah's Witnesses and indoctrinating them. You're not even allowed to have certain types of toys in case they're magic. I can remember somehow my parents let me watch Star Wars when I was growing up, but I actually remember having to cut off the guns from my Millennium Falcon and from my Luke's X-Wing because it wasn't allowed to have anything that could kill people on it. So they do take child indoctrination extremely seriously. When it comes to actually preaching, the preaching work itself, I was a pioneer for nearly 10 years. A pioneer is someone who dedicates, it used to be 70 hours per month, it's now 50 hours per month, voluntarily, without pay, to preaching. And I spent 10 years of doing that, and I never brought a single person into the organization from knocking on their door. I did manage to get one person baptized, but it was someone whose family were already Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not like I was completely inept when it came to conveying information. I mean, hopefully I'm coming across as someone who's relatively competent as a communicator. But it just turns out that, and you don't realize this at the time, you just think, why can't people see? It's just all so obvious. We're living in the last days, and here we are with this wonderful solution. You don't understand why so many people are closing their doors on you, and also when you go back, when you do get interest, all of a sudden that interest just evaporates. And it's only when you get out that you realize, oh, of course they're Googling it, And why wouldn't you? If someone comes to your door with an offer that seems too good to be true, you're going to be maybe excited about it to begin with. You're maybe going to take their literature. But then as soon as the door's closed, you're going to say, okay, so what's the other side? What's going to come up if I Google this? And if you Google Jehovah's Witnesses, the whole thing just implodes, which is why the organization really tries to steer people away from objective information and just channels them purely towards their website, jw.org, which is obviously brimming with their propaganda. It's a very, very difficult message to get people to accept, because what it amounts to is who you are as a person is inadequate if you are not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. You will be destroyed at Armageddon unless you put on the new personality, unless you completely change who you are as a person and start to be obedient to all of the things that Jehovah wants you to do. Then you're in with a chance of surviving an impending Armageddon that's been coming for the last 140 years. But now we really are in the last days, unlike when we first started. Yeah.
Reminds me of a joke that former JW told me a few years ago. It was like, did you not know that we're in the end times of the end times? And I was like, that's good.
They literally call it, I joke about it on one of my most recent videos in the introduction. There's this famous quote from when they had COVID, that's it. So when COVID was first breaking, the governing body very excitedly started doing these updates to let witnesses know how they should deal with the pandemic. Apparently, there's no way that you can know how to navigate your way through a pandemic unless you're in a cult like Jehovah's Witnesses. That's how you do it. So they kind of rather condescendingly started putting out all of this information about what Jehovah's Witnesses should be doing and how they should be dealing with it. And one of the first things they said was, we are now in the last of the last days. So, and that was back in 2020. Now we're in 2025, so I assume we're in the last of the last of the last of the last days. So, but it's just incredible how, a doomsday group is always going to leap on the slightest catastrophe as evidence that, these really are the last days, even though, if you just kind of stand back and look at things objectively, for as long as there have been humans, there have been pathogens, and there have been epidemics and even pandemics. Many pandemics, in fact, most of pandemics have been way more deadly than COVID turned out to be. But you don't think about this objectively at the time. You just think, oh, yes, of course. This was prophesied that there would be illness, and there would be plagues, and there would be all of these things. So you just kind of go along with it.
Yeah. Even just thinking about the dates that you were sharing about Charles Taze Russell's time and Joseph Rutherford's time around the First and Second World War. So there's lots of opportunity there for people that have certain rhetoric to influence people that are feeling perhaps like existential dread about like the end of the world and where do we go next, and everybody's fighting at war. I don't know if my husband's going to come home, I don't know if my children have a dad anymore, any of this stuff. But the interesting thing that you mentioned there about the certain toys, certain children's TV shows, a lot of information control that I think we're quite familiar with at this point about the Jehovah's Witnesses on this show for anybody that's a regular listener. It's like telling children that they are, and adults, I suppose, not allowed to enjoy fantasies and fairy tales and other realities like you would find in the fantastical and fictional work of like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, for example, but also a lot of the stuff that is shared in the Jehovah's Witnesses publications themselves are almost aligned with fantastical and fairy tale and other reality. I don't know what you think about that.
Oh, definitely. It's only, Jehovah's Witness publications, if you think about it, are far more problematic from the point of view of what's age appropriate for children than many of the kind of literature that you've alluded to, like Harry Potter and that kind of thing. I mean, I have on my shelf, I'm looking at it now, a yellow book called My Book of Bible Stories that I was raised with. You can imagine some of the Bible accounts that are rendered in there and the blood and the gore that's depicted. I mean, even the picture of Jesus has like blood streaking down his arms,
Oh my gosh.
And there's there are fairly graphic portrayals. There's one very striking image of, what was her name, Jezebel, who was thrown from her window. But so you have a woman literally being thrown from the window. And the story says that after she'd been thrown from the window, that she was eaten by dogs. So you have in the background these dogs ready to come and eat her. So that's somehow acceptable for children to be raised with. But when it comes to a story about a boy who goes to learn how to be a wizard and flies around on a broomstick playing, wizarding sports, that's somehow inappropriate. So it's I will say this in the interests of objectivity. The current version of the book that I'm alluding to is way more toned down. It's like they got the message from this kind of traumatized generation, that I include myself in, that maybe they went too far with some of the artwork. So in the more recent version, the artwork is far more palatable. Of course, they're only doing that by actually skipping out certain stories or not portraying certain stories as they're told in the Bible. And even if you put all that to one side with the book and everything, what they do make Jehovah's Witness children do at their annual conventions is watch Bible dramas that include some quite distressing scenes, including violence. There was one Bible drama discussing the attempted invasion of Judah by the Assyrians and how an angel descended and killed, was it 180,000 Assyrian troops, and then you see all of the bodies afterwards.
Oh my
And
gosh.
this is something that's required viewing for everybody, no matter what age. They don't put an age number on it. And they actually, and this was unprecedented, they actually, on their JW Broadcasting monthly show, they started to mention that they'd been getting complaints through from parents who were saying, do you not think you perhaps ought to tone down some of the violence in particularly the convention material that we're being required to show our children? And their answer to the parents was more or less, we actually know better than you do. And if it's in the Bible, we should be showing it. And we should be showing it unvarnished.
Super helpful, thought-terminating cliches, sprinkled in with a little bit of Lifton's kind of sacred science. We are the only ones that know all of this information. So be a Jehovah's Witness and give your life to the organization, and then you'll be offered a glimpse into this sacred science. And what we will tell you inside that sacred science is all about the dispensing of existence and how all of your school friends are going to die and you'll get to live.
Indeed.
And that's so traumatic and that's so horrible. And that leads me right into my next question on rapture anxiety and how you've already mentioned that your journey out of the organization and kind of trying to unpack everything included some rapture anxiety in visiting your friend's website and then being worried about the consequences of that. So if my son or daughter, they're 3 and 5, if one of them came home and explained to me that they had a friend in school who was a Jehovah's Witness, who couldn't participate in like Christmas card making, Christmas decoration making, Halloween parties, all of the different things that other JW survivors have explained experiencing on the podcast before, what would be some good advice I could give to my children on supporting that friend who seems maybe a little bit different, who may appear to be a little bit odd just because they have a different upbringing, a different belief system? What are some of the things I could teach my children on helping that child to feel accepted and not feel like an outcast? Because this is probably not just applicable to potential Jehovah's Witnesses that my children come across, but other children in other belief systems with other, different life paths and parenting and all different types of differences.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Honestly, and I'm saying this as a dad. My children are growing up in a Catholic country, and though I certainly don't think that you can really compare Catholicism with Jehovah's Witnesses, I do think that there are certain problematic elements of Catholicism, and it can be quite challenging for my children who I'm raising to kind of think critically, particularly my oldest, to kind of feel like she's the only one who's not going to church all the time and not having these very specific ideas. And my message to her is always just be understanding. Don't come across as a know-it-all. Nobody likes a know-it-all. And I think it would be the same thing in the situation you've described. What children of Jehovah's Witness parents are expecting from their classmates is derision, is bullying, is to be singled out and persecuted. And what they need is the exact opposite. They need compassion and understanding and acceptance and tolerance. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say tolerance, that doesn't mean that that anyone should feel like they should be accepting literature from them. I would draw the line personally with my children accepting any kind of religious literature, whether it's Jehovah's Witness or otherwise, because when children go to school, they should go to school to learn, not to be indoctrinated. And interestingly, Jehovah's Witnesses, they have this mantra whereby when they send their children to school, they tell them, this is your territory. So when grown-ups go door knocking, they're doing their territory in the local community, but they can't get into the schools, they can't get into the classrooms, but you can. So this means this is your territory and you should preach to your teacher, all of your classmates, etc., etc. So be tolerant, to the point where you're not kind of indulging them in their efforts to indoctrinate you, but just be understanding and accepting. It may come to a point at some point where they just need to very frankly say, listen, Jemima, it's really cool that you have your convictions. I have different convictions, and I hope you can respect that. Yeah. I care about you for who you are, whether you believe or whether you don't believe, whether you believe now and end up not believing later, you will always be important to me and I'll always care about you. That would be the kind of tone I would encourage my children to have.
Let's go play football. Let's go play footy.
Exactly. There's always going to be common ground somewhere.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned there about not adding to any persecution is really important for all groups that will be validated by external persecution. They'll say, in the outside world, this is how people treat each other. This is how you'll be treated because you won't be understood for, the true path that you're on, or however people decide to word it. So if people do experience persecution, it almost validates the warnings that the group is giving to its members. So if we can avoid doing that, I think that's strength as well. And it's just really heartbreaking, the stories you hear from people that felt alienated in school and felt like outcasts. And I always say that some of the most wholesome things you can find on Reddit is in the XJW subreddit, where people are having their first tattoos, or they're just having trusts with strangers and trysts with strangers. And I just think, celebrating their first Christmases and Halloweens is just some of the most adorable content you can find. And it's absolutely wholesome to the core. But it comes on the back of, experiencing significant trauma. So it's always kind of like tinged with that sadness, I think.
Indeed.
So.
Sorry, I was just going to say there's a flip side, though, which is that, there's so much repression, sexual repression in particular, and there are so many rules that Jehovah's Witnesses spend their entire lives having to adhere to. I think what can sometimes happen on the other side once they get out is that they can go to excess in feeling like everything that they weren't allowed to do is like a box that must now be ticked, to the point where it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they've learned all their lives that if you are not a non-Jehovah's Witness, then you are you're going to be a terrible person. You're going to be thinking only about yourself. You're going to be consumed by drugs and alcohol. You're going to be on the streets. You're going to be destitute. All of these terrible things are going to happen. And sometimes because people overindulge in some of the things that they were told not to do, including things that, there is reason to be wary, like with drug use, for example. Because people kind of overindulge, they end up becoming the person that the organization predicted that they would become. So it's a little bit, this is one of the kind of minefields that you need to navigate when you do break out of a cult is, okay, I was told I couldn't do this. Is there actually a reason why I can do it? To what extent can I do it, or should I do it? Or is this actually not something that's for me anyway? And so, yeah, that can be a challenge when you get out. Yeah.
And just to circle back to the idea of rapture anxiety, I just wonder what your thoughts are on that particular subject as somebody that grew up in this organization, in this cult, being subjected to certain imagery, certain stories, warnings basically on what could happen to you. Your friends, your loved ones, if you don't adhere to the teachings, or if you don't try and bring others in to save them. There's a lot of stuff here that's put onto children. So it's no wonder it takes a lifetime to really move away from that fear of, the end times, the apocalypse, doomsday, all of the different ways that you can word it, right through to adulthood, even if you've been out for decades. People talk about still being scared during thunderstorms because, they've been out for 20, 30 years because they're like, I've done something today and now it's happening. It's here.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to be completely honest. Like, this is literally the first time I've heard of the phrase rapture anxiety. And for me, rapture means something very specific, which is you are literally elevated to heaven to assume your heavenly life. That's what the rapture is. And in Jehovah's Witness context, they kind of don't, they do and they don't believe in the rapture, so that they don't discuss under the word rapture, but they do believe that just before Armageddon comes, the governing body in particular and anyone else who is anointed will kind of be moved into heaven to assume their role as angels, and they will be involved in the bloodshed at Armageddon actively. So in other words, the governing body, their message is not just become a Jehovah's Witness or die, it's become a Jehovah's Witness or we're going to kill you ourselves, because they're going to be one of the among those riding around. So I guess rapture just means something slightly different to me, but I think more broadly what you're describing is kind of existential dread at the thought of being destroyed or going to hell. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in hell, but undergoing some kind of traumatic, unthinkable punishment due to rejecting the group that you've been brought up in. Would that be kind of what you're describing more specifically?
Yeah, I just kind of like a brief description on Google says that rapture anxiety refers to the psychological phenomenon of an overwhelming fear or anxiety concerning the rapture, a concept in dispensational and premillennial Christian eschatology. So that makes sense there. You know, it kind of makes sense more in that.
Because there are lots of groups that believe in the rapture, and they literally believe that, like, they could be driving along and the rapture is going to come, and all of a sudden they're not going to be driving the car, and their loved ones could be in the car, and suddenly the car's going to be driverless. Not because they've been killed, but because they've been transferred up to heaven. Which isn't quite how Jehovah's Witnesses believe, or maybe they do, but they just don't discuss it that much. But there's definitely a lot of existential dread that comes with not just leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, but even just being a Jehovah's Witness, because you're constantly second-guessing yourself. Nothing is ever quite good enough. No matter what you are doing as a Jehovah's Witness, you could be pioneering, you could be, let's say you're an elder, you could be a missionary, or you could be involved in some kind of building project to assist the organization. You could be working in one of the Bethel or branch facilities. You know, no matter what you're doing, there's always a few extra rungs up the ladder that you probably should be climbing up. There's no way of kind of reaching a point where it's like, what I'm doing is now enough.
Right.
What I'm doing is now makes it a certain bet that I'm going to make it through Armageddon. So you have this kind of existential dread as a Jehovah's Witness, and you also have it when you leave. Even for someone like me who stopped believing in the theology many years ago, I can remember around the time of COVID here in Croatia, we had a series of earthquakes, and when the first one hit, it was like early in the morning, and I hadn't quite kind of come round yet. So I was still kind of booting up kind of consciously. And all of a sudden my entire house is shaking, and I'm already kind of aware that there's a pandemic. And just for a few split seconds, it was only split seconds, but it was enough for me to register it. My mind was going Armageddon bingo. Okay. Earthquakes, check. Pestilences, check, you know. And then obviously my conscious brain booted up fully, and I was able to say, don't be silly, Lloyd. It's just a coincidence. But that is, I think, what you're describing, where you just think, finally Armageddon's caught up with me. I've been so stupid to write this all off as being a cult, but actually it turned out to be right all along. And I think it's human nature for us to continually second guess ourselves. And it's actually quite a healthy thing for us to second guess ourselves, but it's a little bit more sinister with cults, because they program you over many, many years or decades, so that even after you've left, this thinking, not just the existential dread, but other types of behaviors, they stay kind of ingrained as part of your personality. And it can be impossible in some cases to shake all of these residual effects.
It sounds absolutely debilitating and exhausting to live your life inside the organization, always striving to be better, but never quite enough, by design, I imagine, very cleverly by design, but also to then leave the group and feel all those same things, as well as shame, guilt, all of these things that are instilled from a young age after you leave. Maybe, grief because you've been shunned and you can't speak to your family or friends anymore, everybody that you've ever known. Just sounds absolutely like you're never going to feel well rested. I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and you know what? It makes people very angry, and I think that the anger is justifiable. I think that we need to be able to have these feelings and recognize that what was done to us when we were in a cult was profoundly unfair, and it has changed who we are. And this group of people, this group of leaders, has meddled in our lives in the most intimate areas. In some cases, stopping us from pursuing college or university education, or limiting us in terms of our sexuality, telling us that we can't pursue, if we're gay, we can't pursue that, we can't pursue our queerness or whatever. And all of these things, all of these little they might seem like imperceptible little tweaks at the time, but further down the road, when you're not allowed to explore these very, very innocent, straightforward things about yourself, it all adds up. And I think that anger is a very, very justifiable response that people have when they get out and they realize the extent to which they were lied to, and also the hypocrisy of it all, the fact that this group are kind of parading around as though they are clean and they are pure and everything that they do is perfect, when in actual fact you find out that they are covering up child abuse on an industrial scale. So there's the hypocrisy element of it as well. But that kind of brings me back to what we were saying at the beginning, which is that you kind of need to learn to control that anger in a way where you're not isolating the people that you're trying to reach. It's very, very easy to let that anger spill over, so that you end up being confrontational and derisory and mocking and belittling. But you need to kind of exercise a bit of restraint and rein yourself in a little bit, and use that anger and that energy as positively and constructively as you possibly can. That's a real challenge.
So do you think that this is going to be really interested to ask and find out your answer, but over the kind of 10 years that you were pioneering and the 13 and a half years you've been doing this work for, do you think that you've actually de-witnessed more people than you were able to witness, if that makes sense?
Yeah, but by orders of magnitude. Yeah. Well, I literally didn't bring anyone in, but like I said, I had a Bible study with one lad whose family were already Jehovah's Witnesses, and so he was kind of a lost cause anyway, you could say. So I don't lose any sleep over him. But in 10 years of knocking on people's doors, I didn't persuade a single person to become a Jehovah's Witness, whereas in the 13 and a half years I've been doing this, I think I can comfortably say thousands. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I'd love to know what the exact figure is, obviously, but I'm never going to know that. But I think for me, the satisfaction is not just the thought of people kind of reading my book or coming on my channel and waking up. What gives me the most satisfaction is the thought that someone's life will be better because of something that I've written or something I've said in a video, and they'll never know that it was me, and I'll never know about them. So maybe their mum or their dad gets out of the group, or their grandma or their granddad gets out of the group because of something I've done. Maybe 30, 40 years from now, someone's going to be born into a family that is not a Jehovah's Witness family. And they're never even going to think, it's not even going to be on their radar, Jehovah's Witnesses, until maybe later in their lives they have a conversation with their parents. But I love the idea of doing something altruistically to someone who doesn't even know about me. I think that's the most beautiful thing.
It's so beautiful. It makes me a bit teary because you said earlier that we'll never really grasp how far-reaching the Jehovah's Witnesses really are internationally, but that's the same with you and your work and all of the other, former Jehovah's Witnesses that are speaking out and telling their stories. There's been a big thing with the Witness Underground film, and I think they did an appearance at the Decult conference over in New Zealand. So there's loads of stuff happening at the moment, and you'll never really know the level of impact that you've had with your work, and I think that's really exciting.
It is. I think anything anyone can do, even if it's just a single tweet or X post, or whether it's a video or just someone commenting on someone else's video, maybe this is the thing. I mean, we're all different and we all bring different perspectives to the table, and someone else can say something in just a few words. The way I've heard it described, I think it was Matt Dillahunty once who said this. He said, you can hear a message and you can be like, I'm ignoring that. That doesn't make sense to me. And then you hear it again. It's like, no, sorry, that doesn't make sense to me. And then you can hear the same message, and it's exactly the same message, but it's just being said in a slightly different way. And all of a sudden, the penny drops. And it's like, And so just because I have like a large following and a large audience doesn't mean the way I describe things is always going to resonate with everybody. Sometimes all it takes is just a few words put in exactly the right way. And it's like the butterfly effect. You just never know what you've done online, or what you've said to the kid in school, or what you've said to the Jehovah's Witness in the street who stood by the carts. You might not think that it's had any effect at all, but it's like a butterfly effect. You just don't know what seed you're sowing when you approach people who are in this situation in a kind, respectful, tolerant, accommodating tone. You just don't know what impact that's going to later go on and have, just by simply being nice and kind and understanding.
I mean, I could see your little YouTube plaque behind you on the wall there, 115,000 subscribers on your YouTube channel. That's just one avenue of many as well that you're using to spread this awareness and to have people share these stories, and for you to share your stories as well. Do you have the opportunity to speak with current Jehovah's Witnesses? And if you do, what's your approach there? Is it the same, kind of making sure you're being open, making sure that you're being neutral?
Yes, I have a series on my channel called Talking with Jehovah's Witnesses. I haven't done an episode for a while now, but the basic premise is that I walk up to some Jehovah's Witnesses in the street, normally here in Zagreb, but I've done it in a few different places. And I'm mic'd up, so they don't know I'm mic'd up, and I'm being filmed from a distance. And I also, out of respect for their privacy, I blur their faces out. So all you're hearing is their voices. And I basically just present myself as someone who has some experience with Jehovah's Witnesses through family, which is true. So I know a little bit about them, but I'm interested to hear their take and hear what they have to say. And because obviously of my knowledge of the group, I'm able to kind of steer the conversation a little bit. And what I'm trying to do is kind of, again, sow some seeds, but also for the benefit of my viewers, show how what Jehovah's Witnesses believe actually doesn't make any logical sense, to the point where they can kind of tie themselves up in knots when they're talking to you. And what they will also frequently do, which is also very interesting and kind of what I'm aiming for, is they'll just sometimes flat out lie, and they will just flat out misrepresent what their beliefs are. So what happens then is, of course, on YouTube, I put like a caption on the screen. Actually, this is what their literature says. So I kind of fact check them as I'm going along. But the overall point when I'm actually in that moment of talking to a Jehovah's Witness is to just constantly be aware of the fact that I'm essentially talking to myself. How would I feel if this were me kind of 20 years ago? What would I respond to in terms of what's being said? And if I can kind of give them a few things that they might go home and think, what he said there, why is that lingering? Why am I still mulling over what that guy said? That's just fantastic. So hopefully that's happened in a few of those conversations. But if nothing else, I'm helping to educate people that Jehovah's Witnesses, they may not be deliberately setting out to deceive, but the problem is with cults is that fundamentally they're not true. They can't obviously all be true, but as it turns out, they're all false. And the more they kind of try to explain themselves and the more they try to reason themselves, the more obvious that becomes, to the point where they actually end up lying or contradicting something that they say in their own publications. And I think that's really interesting.
So, upon reflecting on all of this work that you've put together and this huge archive of material that you've developed, are you labeled as an apostate? Do you get singled out? Like, is the organization like saying, stay away from this guy? You know, Scientology, they like to fair game. I don't know what other groups are like in that respect. I don't know if they would be like, let's not name him because we don't want people to go and search, look at his stuff. Let's just like put a blanket statement on like, there are apostates among us. How does it work? And has it impacted relationships with any of your family, friends, people you grew up with?
Well, yeah, I am an apostate. That happened quite quickly. In fact, even when I was just asking questions to begin with, I sent my friend an email telling him some of the questions I had, some of the doubts, and I never got a reply to the email. And then I found out that he'd gone round to all of our mutual friends and told them Lloyd's an apostate. And that was literally just me saying, listen, mate, I need some help. I'm having these doubts. So it's very, very quick. The whole apostate thing happens very, very quickly. To become an actual apostate, you really need to be speaking out publicly. And that's a big step to take. And so once I took that step, there was a huge blowback in terms of my family shunning me. My dad hasn't spoken to me since 2013. Yeah. So, and he's met them once on one occasion since Jessica was born in 2014 and Julia was born in 2019, and he's met them both once on one occasion, and that was my initiative. I managed to get him to meet them. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked a little bit. That what I'm saying is that you do have huge personal ramifications for speaking out publicly. In terms of the organization, it's slightly different than with groups like Scientology where they do fair gaming. I would love it if there were a page on jw.org about Lloyd Evans saying, don't listen to Lloyd Evans, and this is what you should know about how terrible a person he is. That would be like my dream come true.
Morning, Jewel.
Their approach is actually to basically pretend that we don't exist, apostate activists, which is actually kind of a smart move. They have been doing some kind of behind the scenes shenanigans. I got hit with a legal notice from their legal department in 2018 complaining about a number of things, most specifically a video I'd done called Pillowgate, which was actually a leaked video. I'm not kidding. I'm going to try to keep a straight face. It was a leaked video, an initiation video for Bethelites or people who work at their branch offices, telling them not to masturbate using their bed linen. I'm not making it up. I'm talking about some of the various problems of a sexual nature that they've had with people who've joined Bethel. And so there was a lot of comedy material in there that I could work with. And so I made a video called Pillowgate, and they basically demanded that I take it down. And so I replied to their letter, no, I'm not going to be taking it down, because what you'll find is that I have used your copyrighted material in a fair use way, whereby I'm showing clearly what you've said and clearly what I've said. And if you tell me to take it down, what you're essentially telling me is that I'm not allowed to criticize you. And I'm sorry you don't get to tell me to do that. And I never heard back from them until I was involved in the ICSA inquiry, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. They really didn't like the fact that I'd been invited as a core participant. And they sent a 9-page dossier to ICSA claiming that I was guilty of hate speech. And they came up with a whole list of examples from my YouTube channel. They clearly had assigned some Bethelites to go through my YouTube channel with a fine-tooth comb to try to find anything that could be incriminating. And each and every example that they came up with over the 9 pages was words that were taken completely out of context. So then I had great fun producing a hate speech series. I called it Hate Speech, where I literally went through with a fine-tooth comb each and every example and showed how they were basically lying to ICSA.
Wow. That is like, there's so many layers to that, because first of all, anybody that's had to sit there and watch all of your content, you don't know what impact that's had on them. Second of all, they're just giving you like clout. They're giving you material, like they're helping to grow your channel without even realizing it. And also they're giving power to you by contacting you in the first place, saying, please stop doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
You just go, no.
Honestly, it's a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor to know that there's a dedicated department in Bethel who were tasked at one point with coming up with a 9-page dossier of, just literally sat there watching my videos in Bethel. It really gives me pleasure to think of that. But all joking aside, if I'm going to be completely honest, the biggest pushback to my work has not come from Jehovah's Witnesses. It's actually come from fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Because, and I was alluding to this a little bit earlier, when you get out of a group like Jehovah's Witnesses, you have a lot of anger, and you especially have a lot of distrust of people in positions of authority or positions of power and influence. So what some, overwhelmingly the response to my work from fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses has been positive, but every now and then you'll get an ex-Jehovah's Witness who really, really doesn't like me because maybe I'm saying something that they disagree with. Like, for example, when I was criticizing Russia for banning Jehovah's Witnesses back in 2017, they latch onto something that I've said, or they maybe don't like the tone in which I've said it, and they just decide that for whatever reason I must be a terrible, terrible person. And unfortunately, over the years, I've amassed like a small but dedicated band of haters who will pounce on my every perceived mishap, and it's actually been quite traumatic to have to deal with that, because sometimes they can make entire like video live streams about something that I've said or something that's happened or something, and there's a page on a forum somewhere where they write for like hundreds and hundreds of pages. One of my friends said at one point, I'm pretty sure if you Google Adolf Hitler, you're going to struggle to find a forum thread that's hundreds and hundreds of pages long about Adolf Hitler, and yet here they are kind of scrutinizing my life in a forum thread of that many pages. So it's actually, but I think that's in a way kind of a testament to just how harmful cults can be, is that they don't even really need to come out and attack me. They don't even need to fair game me and make websites about me, Jehovah's Witnesses that is. All they need to do is just let ex-Jehovah's Witnesses cannibalize each other, because that's how messed up you can be as a result of your experience,
That's so unfortunate. I'm sorry that you experienced that as well, Lloyd. I know a lot of content creators will say it comes with the territory and you shouldn't do this type of work if you don't have like the stomach or the backbone or whatever kind of misogynistic expressions people want to use for that type of thing. But you're coming at this work from your own personal traumatic experiences as well. So that adds an extra layer of kind of convolutedness to the process that you're in. And also, survivor communities, you said earlier that coming out of a cult is a minefield in learning, what you should experiment with, what you should keep with you, what teachings you should leave behind. There's a huge kind of like, keep, throw away process people have to go through. And it takes, a lifetime to decide, or to work through that stuff. But it's a minefield in survivor communities as well for this reason. I've had people say, well, you've had this person on your show, so I can't be associated with you anymore. They don't give any extra context. I have to kind of go through Reddit and other forums to try and piece things together to understand what's just happened. Like that exchange was so bizarre. And when I first started this work, the water was so muddy. I had no idea. I didn't even know about the cult wars, with cult apologists. And people would be like, oh, don't listen to anything Eileen Barker says. And I was like, I don't even know who this person is. So it's taken like half a decade for me to get my head around survivor communities, and they be very, very difficult.
Very toxic is how I would put it. I mean,
toxic,
I've spoken to John Dillon before. He's, done a lot of work in the Latter-day Saints community. He's been targeted. The late, great Mike Rinder, who died recently, he was spending some of his final days on Earth debunking some hatred that was put out against him, trying to attack him. So it's actually quite tragic.
It is.
When you think about it, that people who were purely doing their best to provide a resource that's going to help people end up getting attacked themselves. It's a little bit akin to like NHS workers or doctors or nurses being attacked when they're trying to do some good. And it's very sad, but I think it's just important to focus on the positives. It's just human nature when you're a content creator to kind of blank out the hundreds of positive messages and zero in on the one person who says, I can't believe you would speak to this person. Haven't you done your research? Or I can't believe that you would say this. Who do you think you are? And we blank out. It's just psychology. We blank out all of the goodness and we just zero in on the one person that has a problem. And it's just how it is. Yeah.
It is. It reminds me of something my mum used to say to me, you know, oh, you'll forget 100 compliments, but you'll remember one critique, you know. When you're a child and somebody says like, oh, your hair looks weird today, every day you're like, is my hair weird today?
Yeah.
So it is you know, human nature, but it's still unfortunate and it does make the work harder and it does come with the territory, which is not a helpful thing to say to anybody. But at the same time, I think it's important for us all to remember that divide and conquer, us versus them processes that are happening in these survivor communities, again, reinforce the messages that the cults are teaching people. The ex-Scientology community is so toxic in kind of different pockets of the online communities that they're probably laughing, say, see, this is what happens. When you leave, you'll get attacked. People won't agree with you. You'll be more isolated than you've ever been before. All of the things we warned you would happen if you left are now going to happen to you. Look at all these people. You know, even Mike Grinder's cancer diagnosis, they were probably saying this is what's happened because he left and said all of these bad things about us. It's, you know, he never would have had this diagnosis if he stayed, and all of these really horrible, manipulative, really insidious things. So that's what I always try and say when there's a lot of infighting happening in survivor communities. It's like we are not getting closer to our goal or helping people. We're actually getting further away and helping the cult get closer to their goal of dividing us.
Exactly.
Which is, again, complicated. But I've taken more of your time than I could just talk to you all day, Lloyd. You are absolutely fascinating to talk to. You have so much like history locked inside your brain.
Honestly, sometimes I wish it wasn't there. It kind of follows me around like a cloud.
But of truth.
Yeah.
Truth.
You weren't there, man. You weren't there. Yeah. No, but honestly, it's been a real thrill. And might I say, I've done a few interviews over the years, and I think it's worth kind of just flagging the fact that you're an excellent interviewer. Your questions are fantastic, and really kind of make me think. And so it's an absolute delight to talk to you. And I think that the work that you're doing with Cult Vault is absolutely invaluable. Your voice is absolutely crucial in this sphere and much needed, and it's a real honor to be on the show.
Well, thank you, Lloyd. That's made my day. I don't know how to respond to that. I'm very British right now. I'm like,
stiff upper lip, yeah.
Yes. It's been great to have our conversation. What I find really insightful when I talk to people that have the level of knowledge that you have is that sometimes I'll say things and I'll get corrected. And in those moments, I have to remind myself that I have so much to learn and I can't make those changes and I can't learn those things if people don't correct me. So there's been a couple of exchanges we've had today where you've said, well, actually, it's a bit more like this. And that's so invaluable to me because I'm just going to be spouting nonsense the rest of my life unless people with the knowledge say to me, actually, it's a bit more like this. So
But this is how we learn. We learn through conversations. And like I've interviewed so many people on my channel. Like one like massive black hole in my knowledge that I'm constantly trying to kind of fix is Bible scholarship. And it always amazes me, not just Bible scholarship, but also human psychology. Because obviously, you go to university and you study this stuff for years and years and years. You don't just read a book and suddenly you know all of it. And so there's so many times during an interview where someone's just dropped this, just completely debunked this assumption that I've had. And it's only through having these conversations and having the willingness and humility to learn from other people that we advance our knowledge. And that's precisely why it's important that you have this podcast and that you're having these conversations, because how else are we going to know other than by talking to each other? So
yeah, I agree. And I just have these conversations, then I get to edit them and re-listen to them, and it's like learning it all over again. So it's doubly reinforced. So you've mentioned that you've got a number of books available. One that is 800 pages. I'm guessing that's The Reluctant Apostate.
Yeah, it's a book and it doubles as a doorstop. If you need a doorstop, this is a good book to buy. Yeah, but The Reluctant Apostate, Leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, comes at a price. That's available on Amazon, and also How to Escape from Jehovah's Witnesses, which is much, much shorter and really kind of tailored more for people who literally do need to escape from Jehovah's Witnesses. My first book, The Reluctant Apostate, is written more for people who don't know anything about it. And so what I do is I talk about my own personal story, and I intersperse it with the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, like a forensic analysis of where the movement came from and how various teachings developed. So it's a little bit more of a, you might say, academic book, if I dare use that word, even though I haven't been to university or anything, but yeah.
It's kind of like John Atack's A Piece of Blue Sky, which is, like the historical, it's like an anthology series about Scientology. It's so long, it's like 10 books in one.
Exactly.
So these are all available online. I'll put links to both the books in the episode description. And then please let listeners know, again, the website that you have, the YouTube channel that you have, and anything else that might be helpful for listeners to go and check out.
Absolutely. I will inundate you with links, and I look forward to your listeners coming up with all sorts of imaginative ways to stalk me online. So thank you.
Your YouTube channel is just Lloyd Evans. Like, who gets to have a YouTube channel that's just their name?
I know. That's
so good. Usually mine is just like anything I try is like that username is taken. So you end up having something like Rainbow Marmalade as your username.
But it didn't. Here's the thing, though. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, I started making YouTube videos in 2012. And I didn't cross over onto 100,000 subscribers until 2021. So, especially working in, the way I think of it is what we're working in is a niche. It's a niche of a niche.
Yes.
People kind of think about cults as just this kind of quirky, we're almost working in the category of conspiracy theory. I've even had people who run conspiracy theory channels reach out to me wanting to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses, and I get offended because it's like, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's real,
Right now, it happened to me, actually.
That's almost the kind of subgenre that we're operating in, So again, that's why it's not just about having the conversations, but also kind of sticking with it. And I think after a while, if you have something meaningful to say and you're willing to be open to new ideas, and you're approaching things from a fair, objective, and dare I say journalistic way, which is how you are doing things, it's inevitable that you will gain traction and your audience will grow. You just have to be patient. Yeah.
I find it hard. I'll upload one little video a week, and that's as much as, maybe when the kids are a bit bigger, I'll feel like, and also the masters, I did my masters in like 10 months and I just cannot get back into things. I'm finding it really hard I'll like dip my toe in stuff, but I'm finding it hard to fully commit because that course was so intense with all the deadlines. And, once you go from working for yourself and not having really strict deadlines and just being like, oh, I usually release on Friday, but I'm poorly this week, so I'll do it on a Saturday. You can't do that with your university deadlines. You have to have them in or you fail. So I don't know. It was a bit of a...
Welcome to the world of the content creator. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, now I'm struggling to get back into it. So I will make sure that all of the links to all of these things go in the episode description. And I'm so appreciative, Lloyd, of all of your work, everything that you do, and for your time today coming to chat with me. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, Lloyd, and take care.
Okay, see ya.